delighted that we get to get together again one more time to engage in these amazing tools that come out of the first century Aramaic language and the teachings of the man named Yeshua. Such appreciation beyond all measure. And Ms. Jeannie, just going to check in to start with and see if there's anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room.
It is all quiet.
All is quiet. Okay. Well, if you have a question for us, if there's anything going on in your world you need support with, our call-in number is 563-999-3581. If you're listening on one of those stations where we can't see you and you call that number, you'll be listening directly to the show, at least for now, through the end of January, when we will be making some kind of a change. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. It would be really nice to be able to hold on to this phone number. After, 10 years we've had this number, something like that. In any event, if you call that number, if you're listening on one of those stations where we're syndicated, and we can't see you on our control panel, if you call that number, you'll be listening directly. And then if you push 1, that'll raise a hand and we'll be having a conversation. So if we could be of any support, that's what we're here for. And if you're not using the tool of forgiveness, we advise that you go to your app store and type in the words Heartland, Heartland, Aramaic, forgiveness. You'll be looking at the world's only forgiveness app. And if you put that app to work, you will find yourself freeing yourself of generations and generations and generations of some of the craziest things that have ever happened to humans. And ultimately, that's our objective, is to share that particular tool, especially with every mind, heart, and being on the planet, so that we get to return fully to functioning as human beings. So that's our objective here. That's our work. And so if there are no questions, no thoughts, then we'll turn to the Book of Thomas that we've been covering. We'll go back and touch into the next step, and that is saying number 83 in the Book of Thomas. If you're just joining us for the first time, the Book of Thomas is one of the texts that was not canonized, did not enter into the New Testament, but it is a recording of the purportedly secret sayings of Yeshua that were recorded by Thomas Didymus, and we're up to saying number 83. We've been covering this over the last several weeks. The archives, if you want to listen to them, you can go to our YouTube channel. And if you go to YouTube and type in Michael Ryce, you'll be on our channel. Then look at this section on, is it programs that the tab is, Jeannie, that they're stored under? There's several tabs. Playlist, that's it. Playlists, and you look for the Book of Thomas. That's where you'll find us. So saying 83, Yeshua says, this one's kind of, until you have the brain cells for it, it's kind of nebulous. It seems like, oh, what does that mean? So he says, the images are revealed to the man, and the light which is in them is hidden in the image of the light of the Father. He shall be revealed, and his image is hidden by his light. And this really takes building the brain cells. You remember Yeshua 2,000 years ago said that if you want to understand the meanings of his words, you've got to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. You've got to be seeing out of listening, seeing, whatever, out of the same brain cells as he has, in order to be able to garner the meaning that he has. And that can lead to some complication. You know, I haven't talked in a while about the Aramaic language and the example that I use to demonstrate how easily one can be off in absolute never land without a clue what's been said, even though the words are in front of their eyes. So, just a short example to reinforce this. Let's imagine we've got someone who has written to me from Russia, and they would like to come to, oh, why is this happening to me again intensive? And they don't speak any English, but they're wondering if there's a way to do that. And you happen to be the best translator of Russian into English and into Russian in the world. And I know you have an extra room in your house, so I ask if you'd be willing to pick this person up at the airport and bring them to the intensive every day. And you're just delighted to have that happen. And at the end of the intensive, having, shared a number of meals with this person and spent a lot of time with him, I've come to admire him. And I ask you, as you're getting ready to take him to the airport, if you'd let him know that I think he's just really cool. And you turn to this person in your best Russian, and you tell them that Michael thinks he's got a low body temperature. You translated my words perfectly. You didn't say anything about what I meant, but you translated my words perfectly. Translation is not the key. Having the brain cells is the key. And having a mind connected to being, having a mind connected to love, is one of the biggest keys. You remember when they asked Yeshua, what's most important in the law? He didn't say love your neighbor. He didn't say love God as yourself. That's a total Greek mistranslation. If Yeshua sat in the church where somebody repeated that, when he'd say, that's all Greek to me. In Aramaic, what he said was the key to understanding the law and the prophets was to have a condition in your mind that was called Rachma. Have Rachma set when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor. And Rachma is a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain that keeps your mind on track with living from active present love and keeps your human life, the gift of love that you are, active in your mind. So as opposed to love your neighbor and the Creator as yourself, what he said was have Rachma when you think of the Creator and neighbor, and by so doing you maintain self. And then he says, perhaps the most important part, upon this hangs the law and all the prophets. In other words, if you don't have this condition in your mind, if you're looking through the filters of hostility and fear at those scriptures, you look at all the uproar that's going on in the culture today, the rage at immigrants, the rage at people who don't believe like everybody else does, of people who are so-called evangelicals and so-called Christians. Can rage happen in the mind of one who lives connected to love? It can't without this understanding this word. And guess what? There is no word in the English language. There is no word in Latin. There is no word in Greek for Rachma, for that concept. You need a whole paragraph to understand it, to have the brain cells for it. So, we have people who are in this space, well, I love you so much, I'll kill you because you're evil. It's insane. But unless you've got the eyes to see and the ears to hear, you can't hear what the man said. So when I say you're cool, obviously what's in my brain cells is that I think you're wonderful, you're pretty, we've had a good time together, and I look forward to seeing you again. All kinds of things are included in that word cool. But one whose brain cells are different, listening from the brain cells referring to body temperature, says cool means you've got a low body temperature. And everything is divergent from there. So what we're looking to do with this work is to reestablish as closely as possible an understanding of what the brain cells were that were firing in the man Yeshua when he taught what he taught. So that's what we're looking to do. So this passage 83, again, seems very confusing without the brain cells. The images are revealed to the man, and the light which is in them is hidden in the image of the light of the Father. He shall be revealed, and his image is hidden by his light. Where does that come from? So we see what most humans are locked into, as opposed to the higher faculties, is an inferior product of the mind called perception. So we, quote unquote, see manufactured perception, which in fact is an image painted on the inside of our eyeballs. Most people think they're looking out into the world and they see what's out there. No, you've never seen anything with your eyes. You will never see anything with your eyes. The only thing the eye can do, it's an antenna for light. It is a device that brings light energy in and the information carried on that light energy. It's a one-way valve. You can't see out through the eye. Information comes in, and that resonates information stored in the mind, and the mind produces pictures called perception. They're painted on the inside of our eyeballs. They're imagined images of things, and when we're stuck in that, we cannot perceive the light behind the actuality of life, of the Creator's world. We can't perceive the truth behind them, this perceptual game that we play. We think, when the mind of, what in the ancient scriptures was called the mind of man, produces its images, it's showing us what's going on out there. But, all you have to do is sit in a courtroom and listen to 6 different people testify about the accident they observed, and you'll know that none of them is living in the actuality, because each one's descriptors, each one's, story about the accident is so different. Each one is functioning out of a different set of brain cells. So everything that shows up in the eye is a hollow 3D image. It's missing the dimension of light. That's what he's talking about here. The images are revealed to the man. You got pictures painted on the inside of your eyeballs, but the light, the truth behind them, is hidden. By the very act of seeing, we've cut out one dimension of actuality. Now, as an example, a parable for that one, because that can be a challenge to grasp. Let's imagine we have a two-dimensional creature. The two-dimensional creature knows only length and width, has no idea of depth. So there are only 2 dimensions. And let's imagine we've got an object that, of course, we know is a 3-dimensional object, a basketball. If we pass the basketball through the 2-dimensional creature's sphere of awareness, what does the 2-dimensional creature see as the basketball enters its field of vision? Pardon me, I should say sight. Well, the 2-dimensional creature, knowing only length and width, first off is going to see just a dot. As we move the ball through the space, the dot turns into a line, a little longer line, a longer line. So now we have a series of flat planes because we've only got length and width. And that series of flat planes is separated by time. We see the beginning of the basketball first. We see the last of the basketball sometime later. So now we just invented 2 fantasies. Time and flat planes that don't exist. The basketball is a single event, but not to the 2-dimensional creature. If we want the 2-dimensional creature to play basketball with us, what is the 2-dimensional creature going to have to do? It's going to have to let go of everything perceived from the 2-dimensional perspective. It's going to have to let go of the idea that the basketball is a series of flat planes separated by time. And we're going to have to let go of the fantasy, the hollow 3D or 2D picture. In this case, we're going to upgrade a dimension, but this parable gives us an opportunity to see what the disability is of missing a dimension. When we miss the dimension of light, we're like the two-dimensional creature missing the dimension of depth. Two-dimensional creature makes of a basketball 1,000 flat planes separated by time. They create a whole perceptual construct that exists nowhere except as a picture in the mind. Listen to Albert Einstein for a moment. He gives us a beautiful piece of information. He says, if you think you're separate or separated from the rest of humanity, you're living in an optical delusion. You're like the two-dimensional creature living in a three-dimensional world. Only the dimension you're missing, according to Yeshua in this statement, is the dimension of light. Perception doesn't bring that in. Two-dimensional creature's ever going to play basketball. Everything he or she knows about the basketball from the past, everything of its two-dimensional experience is going to have to go. What does it mean to let things go, to remove errant perceptions from the mind? It's called forgiveness. So all these false surface mind imaginings are going to have to be removed. Now, we're three-dimensional creatures, but there's a fourth dimension, light. And it's missing from the body's eye, from this game called perception. Until we begin to let go of the perceptual world, the 3D perception that we have, and step into actuality. Again, listen to Einstein. You're living in an optical delusion if you think somebody over there is separate from you. We're missing a whole dimension. So what he's saying here is, if you let it go, then you're going to have the opportunity to play basketball. You're going to have the opportunity to step into the fourth dimensional world. The false has to go. And we've built, individually and collectively, we have built and had built into our minds a self based on this perceptual world. You remember a point where Yeshua said, in order for you to live, you've got to die. The false self that's based in the false pictures created or generated by the perceptual mind have to go. You remember the Course in Miracles in the lesson, What is the World? And Jeannie, if you've got a link to the notes for What is the World, or the video, we did about a 25-minute, maybe 30-minute video called What is the World, where we get into the details of that, get into a deeper picture using the example of how perception is created. So maybe if you could put that in the notes, and then recognize that this fourth dimension, there's a challenge point where, remember that song, Mr. In Between, where you're letting go of the perceptual world, but you're not yet firmly planted in the world of light. It can be overwhelming because the new, imagine the two-dimensional creature who's still thinking about this series of flat planes that get wider and wider and wider, then narrower and narrower and narrower until it becomes a dot again. There's nothing true about that. There's nothing true in perception. In fact, Course in Miracles says perception is a world made up by us. Actually, it says it's a skill made up by us that blocks the Creator's world from entering. Takes the place of what the Creator gave us in creation. So when we're in between, and it's a process to move from perception based in carbon-based memory and its limited three-dimensional view to adding that fourth dimension, which changes everything. I mean, imagine if you think of basketball as a series of flat planes separated by time, and all of a sudden a whole basketball is going to come into view at once. Whoa! Where is that going to fit? And it takes time to transition from a three-dimensional perceptual construct in the mind to a four-dimensional actuality. Perception, the images are revealed to the man, but the light behind them, the fourth dimension, is missing. It's not available. And as you do your work, as you forgive and remove the dynamics of errant perception, then you gradually move into the next level. And then it says, he shall be revealed. The truth will be revealed. And there will be times when the light will be so overwhelming that you can't see anything. You know, you've been in a dark room and you go out into the light, and what happens? Can't see. Or you're out in the light and you come in, and gee, the eye is so adjusted to all that bright sunlight that you walk into a dimly lit room and you can't see anything. So this is what he's speaking about here. It's a transition point in one that's moving out of the realities of the three-dimensional mind into the actuality of the fourth dimension, where the energetic light behind perception now becomes available. And then saying 84. Yeshua says, when you see your likeness, you rejoice. But when you see your images, which came into being before you, they neither die nor are made manifest. How much will you bear? So the next step from that last saying, he's saying, when you see the reflection in your face, you like it. Gee, I look in the mirror, hey, this is cool. I look in the pool of water. When I look at perception, I like it. But then he says, but when you begin to uncover your predecessor's dynamics. So again, saying 84, when you see your likeness, you rejoice, but when you see your images which came into being before you, they're not expressed in the world, but they're there, they're not dead. It's going to put you into process and things. There'll be moments where you wonder whether or not you're going insane. When he says that which came before you, saying, stored within your structure, within your genes, are all of the power person dynamics of your generations. Remember that statement, you know, the sins of the father, and remember the word sin. It's nothing to do with this whole Greek crap that they've fed us. The word sin is simply an archery term in Aramaic. If you were standing on the archery range and you went to fire at the target and you missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper would yell sin. It just means you're off the mark. That's all it means. If you think of a human being as incarnated love, which is what we're designed to be, and then you look at the dynamics of the history of humanity, look at your personal power person dynamics, I look at my personal power dynamics, we look at the history of the world, and we look at the rage and the pain and the violence and the viciousness and the rape and the plunder. He's saying that's going to be overwhelming. The power person dynamics in you, when you start to resolve what's within you, it's going to take work to integrate and forgive those dynamics. So again, reading that passage, when you see your likeness, you rejoice, but when you see your images which came into being before you, They neither die nor are made manifest. So these energetic dynamics, unresolved from the past, the hostilities and fears from the past, are not expressed in the world, but creating an inclination toward a certain kind of expression in you. And it can become overwhelming. So he says here, how much of that can you bear? Stepping into that process, I mean, the only way to handle that kind of, that state where you're moving at that speed is to breathe. The intellect is never going to handle it. Rational mind is never going to handle it. Carbon-based memory is never going to handle it. So how much work is it going to take to integrate and forgive those dynamics? And will you have the strength and the forbearance to work through those dynamics, to allow the old rages, fears, guilt, pains, sufferings that are born and bred within our physiology as genetic information, when those things are resonating into activity? He's saying we have the forbearance, the strength to work through it. How much will you bear, he says. And it's kind of a warning for someone entering into the work that there are things that are going to have to be faced, things that are going to have to be dealt with. And our objective is to support you in having the tools and recognizing that you don't have to handle those energetic dynamics on your own when the energy comes up. And there are known tools for working through those things, for opening space to be free of them. So that's saying 84. And I wonder if that stirs anyone for anything for anyone, if that brings up any questions. Does that make sense? And if you're out there in listener land and you're questioning what we're talking about, then push 1 and ask your question. See if we can help to clarify, bring the understanding to another level. And again, if you're listening on one of those stations where we can't see you in our control panel, the call-in number, 563-999-3581. If you call that number, you're listening directly to the show, and then if you push 1, raises a hand in the control panel. Miss Jeannie, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
No, it is still quiet here.
Okay, cool. Then let's go to saying 85. Can be another one of those challenging things. Adam came into being out of great power and great wealth, and yet he was not worthy of you. For if he had been worthy, he would not have tasted death. I think this is a powerful statement from Yeshua, recognizing that in our original being, we are designed to live eternally. If we give up that original connection, that original state of being, then we introduce into our eternal energy systems energy patterns that never belonged within a human being. And those energy patterns are what literally take apart or destroy that which is designed to be integrated for eternity. Literally, we are designed. You and I are designed for eternal life. Now, you remember in the scriptures they said there'll come a time when the whole world will be fooled. And most everybody who hears me say that, Michael Ryce, that has got to be one of the most insane things. I mean, look, everybody that I know in the world is already, that's over 120, is already dead. So how could anybody even imagine that we're designed for eternal life? Well, as that last statement said, the truth's going to be covered up because the light's going to be so bright when you start to open to it. And the objective here is to allow it to open and gently let yourself move through the work of forgiving, of removing the energetic patterns of death. That means ultimately facing all fear and hostility and removing it from physiology so that you couldn't generate a hostile thought if you tried. That's a significant amount of work, but that's what we're here to do. And Miss Jeannie tells me that we've got somebody in the phone queue with a hand up. So let's say hello.
And it's Miss Susan, and I apologize. I thought your hand was still left over from where you were talking to Dr. Tim. So welcome.
Hi. Yeah,
Hey, welcome, dear heart.
Thanks. I undid number one and did the number one again, but that didn't work this time. So anyway, I had you're talking about the chaos in our political system right now, and I know there's an issue with
not just the political system, but the world.
Yeah, the world. Yeah, and we're right at the head of it. So,
yeah.
There's an issue of whether we're going to get a king instead of a president, and there's a lot of talk around that. But that reminded me of the fact that Pilate and Jesus had a discussion about, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said an odd thing. He said, you have said so, or you are saying it, or some such thing.
Right.
Which seemed like a riddle. I wonder if you've had any thoughts, you being an Aramaic scholar, if you've had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, if you go back further, you'll see there's a whole passage, a whole story about people who are monotheists, who are working toward and have a theology of working toward functioning out of love as human beings. And they look at all these other countries around them that have kings, and they say, give us a king. They say to their leader, give us a king. That was Moses. They said, give us a king. And then there's this whole set of warning. Like there's a warning label that comes with this thing called king. And, he's going to take the best of your young women and put them to his service. He's going to take your men and he's going to make them soldiers and foot soldiers and blah, 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 and basically destroy you. And so, again, I think it was Moses. Moses has this conversation with God, and God says, look, if that's what they want, give it to them. They're not going to be happy with it, but hey, and that, I think, comes from people who live in this one world universal. I actually had an experience this week, and I'll share a little bit later, but this one world universal religion of blame, which I've talked about so often. But what I realized is it's not just a universal religion of blame, it's a universal religion of blame, of guilt, of suffering, and victimhood. And there's this, if we just had a king, then the king would take care of us, as though the king could possibly be responsible for or heal anybody's blame, pain, or suffering.
Right.
And so there's a warning, don't do that. And, I think that warning very much applies today. And unfortunately, there's an ancient Spanish Catholic group that has this monarchy as their goal, and basically thinks that the world should be run by another, and a caution in there. I'm not talking about true Catholicism. I'm talking about this strange cult of Catholicism that wants to put a monarch back on the throne and has put a lot of pieces in place for that to happen. And unfortunately, it involves an inquisition that is going to be pretty tragic, and, about the same as it was back in, the 12th, 13th century. That's if you've got the eyes to see and the ears to hear, and you're looking at what's happening behind the scenes, that's something that's, it's coming down the pike. And there's a lot of caution signs, again, if you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, but most people are distracted by all the hostility, fear, rage, guilt, grief, all those things that keep them in the three-dimensional mind and the world of perception, which, if one hasn't resolved the hostility and fear within them, they're likely to buy into. So,
Michael, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you talking about our country and what's happening now, or the Catholic Church?
I'm talking about right here in America today. Not the Catholic Church. I'm not talking about the Catholic Church.
You said.
I'm talking about a certain faction of Catholicism.
Oh, I see.
A certain cult that pretends to be Catholic and is verbally being, speaking of themselves as Catholic, but it's anything but Catholic, would be my take.
I haven't heard of that. I've been hearing about evangelicals, but I haven't heard about Catholicism or any part of it.
They're walking arm in arm. Well, have you noticed that that the Supreme Court now has 6.5 Catholics, supposed Catholics, out of the 9? 6.5 of them. It's never been before. And they were all placed on that throne, and here's a group of people who are basically crowning the king. They've said, well, you can, anything you do, if you call it an official act, doesn't matter how criminal it is, you'll be okay because you're our king.
Yeah.
That's in essence what they've said.
Right.
And if you look at what's behind that, there's the man who placed all of those people there. If you look into the Federalist Society, you'll find a man who, if you look at some of his speeches, I mean, he sounds like an inquisitor right out of the 12th century, talking about Americans as demons serving the devil. And, I mean, it's just insane. I mean, it's right out of the 12th century. And that's behind the curtain, We got this noisy, floppy insanity going on that's distracting everybody, just like the magician who, while he's doing his sleight of hand with his right hand, has got a puppet over here in his left distracting everybody. Going on under the radar. And you'll notice that a guy who just, recently came into the seat of power is a man who, I think he's changed his name 3 times now, John Donald Bowman.
Oh, yeah.
He's changed his name 3 times. Most people don't have any idea what's going on there. And in 2019, he became, quote unquote, just out of the blue, became a Catholic. And all of a sudden, he's, boom, right up there behind the guy who's so failing that he probably isn't going to last a year mentally or physically on the throne.
Yeah.
So what's that resonate for you?
Well, I've been resonating a lot and having to do a lot of breathing, and I've been listening to probably too many commentaries about the checks and balances we still have in place in the states with our governors and judges, and even among Republicans in Congress who are saying no to some of this insanity, which is fantastic, pitting that against some of the scary things that we're reading. We get The Week magazine, and it was just, I've never read anything so horrendous. So just watching the reactions, which are judgments, watching the fear, talking to friends and not talking to other friends because they're on the other side. I have a few of them who are perfectly intelligent, decent, law-abiding citizens who somehow manage to make this choice, the choice for this new regime, and aren't having a problem with it. I wonder if that's still the case, because things change day to day, and you'd think they'd say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize. It's a kind of, it's incomprehensible to me, and whenever I have a discussion with anybody on the Democratic side, we always end up saying, I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't know how this happened. I don't understand the thought processes.
The cabal behind it all has been working behind the scenes, has billions of dollars, and is working behind the scenes to create this inquisition that will eradicate the devils that are trying to take over America.
I lost you. Which side are the devils? Are we?
We are. If you're not with the king, then you're one of the devils.
Oh, I see. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Well, the man who did my
they're talking about
surgery.
getting rid of birth control. You know, the whole thing. It's all out of this cult that wants to make slaves of women once again. One of the things they talk about in one corner of the game is that the biggest problem in America, one of the big problems in America, is educated women.
Oh, yeah. I know. I've been paying attention to that, too. Yeah. Well, anyway, we have our work to do, because it isn't only using and doing the tools, but we've got to act.
Yeah.
And yet, there's a lot to be said. A lot of people saying, oh, just let it be. There's nothing you can do. Even my housemates here, who are refugees, they're all documented. I don't think they would be thrown out. But they're saying, the young man, he's 19, he saw me listening to a podcast, one of my trusted sources. He said, why are you still listening to that stuff? You've got to let it go. There's nothing you can do about this. Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, is that true? Is that true?
Unfortunately, no. Let me just read from the guy who's in control of the billions and has selected all 6.5 justices we're talking about, or we should say perhaps injustices on the Supreme Court. Here's what he said as he was receiving an award from his Catholic cult. Quote, Catholic evangelization faces extraordinary threats and hurdles. Our culture is more hateful and intolerant of Catholicism than at any other point in our lives. I mean, that's just such a fraud. It despises who we are, what we profess, and how we act. And here's how he refers to Americans. He says, these barbarians, secularists, and bigots who've been growing more numerous over the past few years, they control and use many of the levers of power. That's what he said just recently. And this guy controls billions. And he selected all 6 that are on the court. In another presentation, he said, quote, just a second, let me get caught up with it here. These opponents, talking about Americans now, are not just uninformed or unchurched. They are often deeply wounded people whom the devil can easily take advantage of. These barbarians are conducting a coordinated and large-scale campaign to drive us from the communities they want to dominate.
Wow. That's exactly what he's doing. It's totally mirror. It's a mirror. It's like his world. He thinks he sees it out there.
That's it.
So what do we do, Michael?
Do our work, and then bring the presence of love into the world and take whatever action we're guided to take. Otherwise, all the political fluff going on is just the magician's distraction while this is going on under the surface.
Yeah.
So it's wake-up time.
The mechanisms are so polished. Evidently, during the whole 2016, after that election went through, the campaign experts, the ones who did all the ads and advertising, kept notes of what they did and what worked and what didn't, so that we actually were experiencing two parallel universes. The people who listen to certain news, and I'm aware of Fox News. Sometimes I would watch it just to see what was happening on there. But evidently there was a mechanism where for 24/7 negative ads against the Democrats were being cycled over and over and over again very effectively, and I wasn't even aware that it was happening. We are kind of clueless about
this practice. This whole cabal has been working diligently, overly well-funded for 50 years on this.
50, wow.
Yeah, so the practice, the skills needed to pull it off and keep it hidden are pretty deep. It's bizarre.
It's horrifying. Do you think we're a healthy enough nation? This is just your opinion, because how would anybody know we're healthy enough to, it's like having a good immune system that can fight off a disease. Are we strong enough?
I certainly hope so.
Yeah. Well, back to what Jesus said to Pilate, he didn't directly answer him. And I'm wondering if it was just too dangerous to be direct. He did say, my kingship is not of this world.
But and basically, that's exactly what those the two sayings, 83 and 84, whatever the numbers were this morning already, or today, that's exactly what he's referring to, is there are those who look in the mirror and they see perception, they see a construct generated by their minds based on the content of their minds. And then there are those who will see the light behind it, have the fourth dimension available. And those who've been brainwashed into the hostility and fear-based game. Let me just read another little piece here. The guy who paid off in 2017 a woman that he sexually assaulted and is supposed to be taking over the military. Here's what he wrote in his book. America will decline and die. A national divorce will ensue. Outnumbered freedom lovers will fight back. The military and police, both bastions of freedom-loving patriots, will be forced to make a choice. It will not be good. Yes, there will be some form of civil war. It is our present moment is much like, he says, and go back, this is an inquisition coming. Our present moment is much like the 11th century. We don't want to fight, but like our fellow Christians 1,000 years ago, we must. Arm yourself, metaphorically, intellectually, physically. Our fight is not with guns yet.
So they're saying that on this side, and yet we must do the same, if I followed you right.
I'm not sure what you mean by must do the same.
We have to fight too.
Oh, I think if we fight, we just go down in flames again. That's using the tools of the ego, and that's the game that has kept humans in the third dimension and locked out of the light. That's exactly what Yeshua was talking about here. And this guy finishes the last of his book. He closes his book up. This is a guy that's supposed to take over the military. It says, "See you on the battlefield. Together with God's help, we will save America." Deus Vult. And Deus Vult is a fake war cry that has purported to have come from the Pope, which is not true, from the 11th century. And the Crusaders, who were out there just slaughtering everybody who was, not one of them, used that as a phrase so they'd recognize each other. Deus Vult. And this guy has got white supremacist tattoos all over his body, and this Deus Vult is his greeting in his book.
God.
Yeah, for sure. This whole so-called Christian national isn't Christian. It's insane.
Well, in Hinduism, and I know we're getting outside of Christianity, but in Hinduism, God was told Arjuna to fight unperturbed by grief. He did tell him to fight. And in Ramakrishna says, or maybe it's Jesus who says, "Be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove." So maybe the wisdom of the serpent means we have to strike and sting. We have to have our venom on this side to counteract the venom on the other side, because that's the medium of the war.
Well, remember that what you put out is what you sow into your own field. I create the original. I get the original. They get the carbon copy.
I understand what you're
it's going to take conscious awareness.
Yeah. I agree with you, that would be ideal, but we might all physically be dead at the end of it because we didn't resist in the form that they are fighting us in.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
do I pick
the
up
founding
a gun?
fathers.
Yeah, go ahead.
The founding fathers gave us a set of guide rails. And if we stick with those guide rails and hold the space, there will be a transformation, I believe, that will take us out of that level of insanity.
How did they word it?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Our
the founding fathers were? I mean, that's the whole
guardrails.
Constitution. That's the whole Constitution. That's why a certain person today wants to throw the Constitution out. Said, trash it. It's, it doesn't.
So
you can't have a king under the American Constitution.
Right. So you're saying that our strength in the Constitution, in the local governments, state governments, could do this because the federal government looks as if it's going to be swallowed up.
Well, the efforts have been there forever, and there's a state of organization that simply needs to be dealt with. And certainly it's going to be a challenging time.
Yeah.
Is there enough decency in the Congress and the Senate to step up? I don't know.
It's been heartening to hear some of them, the resistance for some of the ones already, even before anything has started.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Well, and if you look at some of the behaviors, those who are this well organized still are shooting themselves in the foot. So I think their self-destruct plan is, they're getting the original of what they're putting out.
Mm-hmm.
Breathing with you.
Yeah. Breathing with you.
Connecting to love. Claiming our true essence.
How did we get here?
There's an interesting film which you might want to give a watch to, and it shows what the mind that always wants to own everything is filled with greed and wants to own everything for itself and is willing to kill to get it. It shows that mind and how it operates. It's called Killers of the Flower Moon. If you haven't seen it, look it up and watch that film. I assume it's probably on Amazon. Killers of the Flower Moon. It's just like a good picture window into how the mind that's trying to take over today operates and what it did back just, a century or so ago in America to the Native Americans who, in Oklahoma, Native Americans were given land and then they found oil on the land and they became overnight millionaires. And this movie shows the mindset, exactly the mindset that's trying to do this to America today. It shows that mindset coming in and what it did to the Native Americans, and it's horrific. But it shows what that mind's capable of, and the games it plays, the ways it weasels its way in. So if you haven't seen that, you might find that in the context of this conversation, you might find that movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, interesting. You can take some worksheets with you and be ready to breathe.
Right, I didn't think so. All right, Michael, well, thanks for answering those questions.
All right, dear heart, and our time is up. So everybody, thank you for joining us. Create the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world. Blessings. Bye-bye.